Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Interface. Don't forget, as always, to like the video if you're watching on YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe to us also on our socials. We're now on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, so don't forget to follow us on there. And if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Music, don't forget to follow us there as well, so you don't miss out on the next episode. So this week we're with Lisa D Dance. So Lisa, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on the show, Lisa. So, just a quick one on you. Obviously, you're a UX researcher, service designer, author of Today is the Perfect Day to Improve Customer Experience book. And your career has been around, a deep commitment to like improving the intersection of technology, designing customer experiences. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to deep diving into the book this week. So, yeah, Lisa, I guess we could probably start from the beginning, right? You said your UX journey started when you were 9 years old. I would love to hear a little bit more about that and how that's kind of shaped you into who you are today.
Well, certainly. So when I was 9 years old, I told my mom I wouldn't shop at this particular store anymore because of how they treated their customers. And what I had observed was around when customers wanted to return things, they made the process just so unpleasant. And to me, it didn't make any sense because these were customers on any other day, they were customers who were buying things. And just because they had, to return something, you made the experience so unpleasant that they wouldn't want to return again. And even at 9, it I could see that both the customer and the business should be able to get what they want, right, and not have it be a negative experience. And so I was always strategizing in my mind ways to improve it for both the customer and the business. And so I was always observing those things as I was a customer, or observing, like when I was in a physical store, what the signage said, what the receipt said, what was on the register, or online, what the website, how is the login process, all of those things. I didn't know user experience was a thing at that time, but I was just observing what was going on and trying to make improvements within it. And so, yeah, that's how my path started. Now, of course, when I graduated from college, user experience wasn't a thing. And even now, there are people who don't know what user experience is. So I was always in the roles that I was in, and I managed sort of like different kind of customer programs. I managed like a customer retention program for a mortgage company. I worked in sort of like an HR, which was like sort of around managing the administration of the pension benefits and things like that. I was always in those places, which are pretty complicated, trying to advocate for, let's make this as easy as we can for the customer so they understand it. But also, I was also advocating on the business side. Well, hey, if we make this easier, we won't get as many calls. That reduces costs. So, that was the path I was always going on within roles. And then I had my second layoff. That happens, right? And I said, it's something to this, this piece of what I'm, advocating for customers and businesses. And as I started looking and trying to figure out my, new path, I stumbled on user experience. And then it totally clicked that this is the things that I had been trying to advocate, and there are actually, methods around that. And so I wound up taking an interaction design certificate program that user research was a big part of it. And then I felt like, oh, I'm home. Like this is speaking to the things that I had been always trying to do. So that's sort of how my path from 9 to today.
Yeah, and I think it's great to see how, from that young age, you were already kind of, seeing areas that could be improved for customers, and like it's great to see how that's just carried through your life, and it's almost like you're destined to be in this, right? Which is it's amazing, right? And was it like what in, because obviously you landed in research, right? um Obviously doing an interaction design course, you could have gone into lots of different paths, right? Was there anything specifically in research that led you to focus on that a little bit more in your career?
Yeah, well, I'm always interested in, what people need and what people want. And then, in research, you get to dig into those types of things. And so I just felt like I was more, I could bring more of my specific skill sets to it. Like one thing, I think I have a sort of special skill for identifying, people who are vulnerable. And so like within research and making sure that we're not overlooking people and their needs. And so that was just really more in tune for me, because I was never a pixel perfect designer. But I was very good at helping design the pathways to like complex information and understanding what people needed to understand something that was pretty complex. So that pointed me more into the research aspect of it.
Nice. And yeah, I think Lisa, it'd be great also to understand, like, because obviously you've been doing a bit of the research and kind of, I know you also had a little bit of time in service design, but I'm sure everyone wants to know what led you to this book. And maybe you can tell us a bit about the book that you wrote. Today is the perfect day to improve customer experiences.
Yeah. So I guess I'll say two things about that. One is people might say, well, if she says she's a user experience researcher, why is the book not today is the perfect day to improve user experience, right? Well, that's because that typically people think of user experience as just about technology. Now, it's not, but that's what people mostly think of that. And the stories in the book reflect not just issues with technology, but it could be something that's in person or on the phone or other interactions that aren't just technology. And so I felt like customer experience would really encapsulate the the totality of what I'm speaking of. But then also too, I always say the title's a bit of a misnomer because it probably should be "Yesterday was the perfect day to improve customer experiences," because what the book is a series of real life stories of customer experiences that have just gone totally wrong. And they're illustrated stories. I was lucky enough to work with a great illustrator, Antonio Meza, and illustrated these stories of customer experiences that have gone wrong. And the story, by being illustrations, rather me just writing out the stories, you're able to get like the details, the emotion, like all the processes, but like in a one pager, right? Instead of me writing 5 pages of this happened, this happened, this happened. But so it has these illustrated stories, but then it also has um, a breakdown of what has happened and what's the issues are in the organization, why these issues have happened. But it also breaks down the cost to both the customer and to the business, and that's really important because customers, there's a cost when things go wrong, and businesses need to appreciate that. And then also, I think that there are some hidden costs that businesses are not really considering when they make decisions that affect customer experiences. And so, what really motivated me to write the book is it started in my own personal life that I started to notice that my to do list would never get finished, right? And it wouldn't get finished because anytime I had to interact with a business or a company or some kind of organization, oftentimes there was some issue that was preventing me from being able to complete this. I couldn't log in on the website. Some information is wrong. I need to go back and check on something. Something was going wrong and I wasn't able, it was not in my control to be able to resolve it. And as I started just to talk to other people and share like stories I had, then they had a story too, right? And so I started to say, okay, there's something here to this. And I'm seeing that out in the marketplace, people are having like really sort of ridiculous stories around oftentimes simple transactions, right? And I didn't think that anyone was talking about it the way I was talking about it. Because what also encouraged me to write the book is that these issues were starting to overlap, so that a person not only had one issue, then they'd have another issue that they'd have to try to resolve, and it was taking them time away from things that they needed to do. Oftentimes their money was in limbo, and they were frustrated, right? And it was always never in their control. They couldn't go into the company and get their order delivered, or they couldn't, go into that database and correct the information. So it's never about them. So that encouraged me to write it, because I felt like no one was talking about it that way, and there needed to be appreciation of it, because I don't think company decision makers often understand how bad a bad customer experience is. And so the book is just present illustrated stories of how that's happening.
Why why do you think that's the case? You know, like why do you think that organizations have no idea, or I don't know, like have an ignorance towards it?
Well, I think a couple of reasons. So one, a lot of times people are just looking at metrics, and metrics don't often tell all of what's going wrong. They might say, oh, someone has a bad experience and they gave us a one, but they don't realize that in that one, there were 8 different things that went wrong, right? So if they're just looking at metrics, they're not actually talking to customers, they're not actually reviewing like call center calls and transcripts and things like that. They aren't seeing it that way. Additionally, the feedback loops within companies often are very poor. So there can be an issue that a frontline worker is has seen, and they don't have any way in these big huge companies to actually reach the people who could actually fix the problem. And so I give you an example of this, and this is something that's kind of ongoing. Is that um, I was trying to order a pizza for an event with Domino's, and for some reason, this particular address, every time I would input it in, it would change the address. So the address was West Broad Street, and it would change it to Westbrook Avenue, and it even changed the zip code. And so I actually had a pizza ordered, and then I glanced back at the confirmation and said, this is not the right address. And so I had to call the store. And so I wound up calling that store. They had to cancel the order because they couldn't deliver to that address. Talked to another store and got it ordered. I told both stores what the issue was. And here it is 5 months later, and I can still go back on the Domino's website, and the address hasn't changed. So that feedback loop to who could actually correct the issue, it either it was never communicated or it was never acted on. So yeah, those are two of the reasons that I see, is that the over relying on metrics and not talking to customers, but also having really poor feedback loops within the organization to communicate information. And that's one of the things I point out in the book, is often these informational silos within organization.
That must be so common as well. You know, like I just think about like how many customers actually called in to an organization, like stating what their problems are, and whether or not they're just tallied on a database somewhere as okay, we've had X number of complaints about this, or they're just completely ignored. And you know, and in both situations, they probably don't even get reported up to people who can do anything about it. What what can companies do more to like kind of plug that gap and kind of make sure that those feedback loops are actually looping and they're not kind of fragmented.
Well, one of the pieces is definitely having, different parts of the organization interact more, having like, you know, at least, a monthly or quarterly meeting where you are getting information from the front line to like actually teams that create products or have to make corrections on it, so they actually hear and understand what's going on. And I think it needs to also be more than just management level talking to each other, because that often what's happening on the ground floor isn't communicated as well through management levels as it is when you have the actual workers together, trying to communicate that information. So that's one way. I think it's important to have research and testing, so you're actually actively looking for those things um, with it, and managing technical debt, different things like that, as well. But really making sure that those feedback loops are really strong, and you're going beyond the metrics, and so you can actually hear the issues that are happening.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Lisa. I think when I think about some organizations that I've worked in as well in the past, I feel like another important thing is making sure that someone's like taking ownership of it, right? As well, like having the accountability to play back the findings upwards to different teams, right? Because that's always a problem as well, right? Is that sometimes we have this tool which is capturing the data, but we have, a team that are, giving us feedback. But is anyone working on like really cascading that? And that tends to be a big problem as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, having somebody responsible for that. And I also think I see within like product driven organizations where each team has a small part of the journey. And if you don't have someone like overarching, that's really making sure that the journey is is cohesive, and is bringing in that feedback for it, then that does continue within it. And then also, one thing I think is really important is that organizations have to incentivize actually making improvements. If you're incentivizing releases and features, then you get a feature factory, right? If you incentivize improving customer experiences, then you will get more work on customer experiences. So that's important too, because I've been in companies where someone's pushing to have a feature added to the product because they want to put something on their performance review, right? Not because it was really necessary, but they want to show that they have done something. And so that they were getting incentivized by that versus being incentivized by actually making the product better.
How can we change that though? Like, how can we, kind of just change the kind of direction, right? Because you mentioned, people are incentivized to release features that end up delivering business outcomes, and ultimately that's like bottom line, like revenue, right? Um, but if you flip that on its head and say like just focus on the experiences, sometimes that doesn't always translate into monetary return, or at least not in the short term, right? And we know a lot of companies can be short sighted, but how can we start to change that, that angle, and influence internally to kind of get people to focus on the right things and not just, like you said, their portfolios?
Well, I definitely think we're definitely going to run up against capitalism, right? And as capitalism is practiced now, with short term and shareholder value is more important than everything. So inside of that box, I also would suggest that people try to chase the money, because oftentimes there are things that could improve the customer experience that are costing the company money that they aren't associating with customer experience, right? So they think that their new initiative or their new releases and isn't doing what they wanted to because it's a sales and marketing problem, when in fact it's a customer experience problem. So if you start kind of gathering the number of complaints and the issues with that, or how much um, service or customer support is spending on this particular issue with it, and then also accumulate well how much you're going to spend on additional marketing and sales, and start to show, okay, here's some numbers that show if we did a better job of uh, releasing things, that have less bugs, or releasing things that customers want, we're going to one save this expense of customer service and customer support, but also we're going to save on these additional marketing and sales expenses. So I do think it's worth investigating and seeing if you can get some numbers that people aren't really appreciating within it. I don't think that always people are appreciating all of the potential expenses or a cost of bad customer experiences, because there are things like, which I point out in the book, about reputational management. And like when you have a product that has issues, and so I'll give you two examples of that. One, there was a article a couple of months ago about Vanguard in the Wall Street Journal, and Vanguard was getting a new CEO, and it was talking about that their customers, longtime customers who had been very loyal, had been complaining for years about the bad customer service, as well as um, their different apps and website and the problems with it. And so, I mean, this has got to a point that this is an article in the Wall Street Journal, imploring the new CEO to focus on those things. Well, how much is that really costing them, right? Within their reputation, right? So, oftentimes, are companies considering that reputational management? Um, they're considering the cost of it because they have to pay it. But are they really considering that if we made these changes, how much less of this that we have to do? And especially now with the internet, and there's so many different platforms and ways for customers to express uh, their negative thoughts about a company. That's a big way. Also, there's additional costs for additional security and risk management because customers are angrier than they have been before. And I quote in the book, there's this national customer rage survey, the 2023 edition of it was talking about how customer rage and revenge is increasing, right? And so you have to worry about additional security measures and different things like that. And so, are they associating that with maybe some of the decisions that we're making with the product? So that those are ways. And I'll give you the second example is that like the Sonos app, they had a release back, I think it was in the spring, and they just had horrible um, reviews and customers being angry about it and having been loyal customers, and how much that's costing reputationally. And just recently, in this last week, I think it was, the CEO stepped down because it's been that bad, and their stock has tanked, and they didn't have the sales that they were anticipating for Christmas. So there are costs there that companies can consider, and help them to point them back to, yes, if we improve the customer experience and we eliminate some of these issues, especially around technology, we would have the success that we're looking for.
Yeah, otherwise it's going to cost you, right? It's going to cost you big time. And
Yes.
it's funny because I always feel like when we talk about customer experience and the measurement of it, I feel like that's always it seems to be like a cop out answer, right? It's like, oh yeah, but how can we measure long term value, or how do we measure, um, if customers are like, if the negative customer service is impacting our sales, right, or impacting the numbers? It's always a bit of a cop out answer, right, to say that it's hard to measure. But I don't know what you think, Lisa. It almost feels like it's something that you better get measured, right? You have to find out how you can measure that, right? Because as you said in those two examples, it's really costing some large organizations a lot of money.
Right, absolutely. If they just looked at the difference in what they projected to pay on, PR and reputational management and what they actually had to spend, like, okay, right there, that's a great example. How much have you had to spend on additional security and additional risk management um, because of, particular different issues? So I think that there are ways to measure it. And then I think also there just needs to be a mind shift within companies. One that, and this is something that I talk about, is that customer relationships and transactions are value exchanges. Each party is expecting to get something of value that they want out of the transaction, right? And so when you think about, as things are going on, are customers getting that, you know the value they're expecting out of the transaction? And so if you think about it that a way, when you have issues, then therefore there's going to be a cost. Customers may not go in and have a quarterly meeting and look at their OKRs and things like that, but they do have a calculation when it's too expensive to do business with you, right? Because you've cost me time, you've cost me money, and you frustrated me, right? So yeah, so we kind of have to think about it. I think sometimes we don't. Sometimes I think companies just don't think of customers um, as equals, right? That they have their own needs and wants and desires too. And when things are going bad for them, then they if they have a viable option, then oftentimes they act and move on to something else, right? So yeah, we can measure that they aren't here anymore.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I really resonate with that what you said there, Lisa, was the fact that I think businesses, they don't necessarily see the value in spending that additional money to improve their overall customer experience. If let's just say we're talking about like the Vanguard app that you mentioned, right? As you said, any small company could come in and have an amazing customer experience and then overturn these companies because although maybe like Vanguard has the heritage, if the experience doesn't match up to the expectation of the heritage or of the product or the brand, that can also cause that negative experience, right? Like this, I can give an example. I'm not going to name the coffee shop, right? But there's this coffee shop that I have been going to, and the coffee's okay. It's not like the best coffee, but the experience I get when I go in there, right? The way that they, approach me, they give me a great table and they kind of really kind of give me that experience that I'm kind of, you know, really craving when I go in there. Even though the coffee's not that great, I'm still going there, right? And it's just a great example of how, if you can nail that customer experience, whether it be on your app, whether your ecosystem, it's gonna, regardless of what you do, you're halfway there, right? You're already winning.
Absolutely. And I think even even more basic, basic to that is oftentimes the companies are losing because they aren't even delivering on that basic. They don't even have to delight customers. They just haven't even delivered on the basics of what they said that they were going to deliver in the value exchange, right? So like the coffee shop, they keep giving you the wrong coffee, right? At this other chain, the wrong coffee, or um, uh, my sister loves Starbucks, and how she got out with Starbucks was because they didn't have the coffee that she liked. Oh, we stopped selling that at 11 o'clock. Oh no, this doesn't have available. It's this is that. It was like she could never get just basically the coffee she wanted, and so therefore she has switched and goes to another coffee shop, right? So like, are we even getting the basics down? And like, the bigger the companies are, I think sometimes the bigger the challenges they have in delivering just on the basics.
I think they forget what the basics are. You know,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
they're around for so long, and they probably were founded on kind of like good intentions, right? And then they've probably ended up growing so vastly, or sometimes even globally, that they've just forgotten their foundations, and it's just become just purely value, like, well, transactional. pretty much, right?
Right. Absolutely. And a lot of, companies, they're, operating on that brand, but that only goes so far. You know what I mean? At a certain point, it's like, yeah, you were great, but you're just not even delivering on that anymore.
So like this effort that you're kind of talking about, like, is this what I think you kind of mentioned in your book as like being like the unpaid labor that kind of customers have to.
Unpaid customer labor. So that's
Mm,
that unwilling, unwilling amount of time, money, and frustration that a customer has to spend just to get what they paid for, or to get information, or to get something resolved. And from the stories in the book and the stories I've collected, I would say that it's in getting untenable. Like in some of these situations, the time and the money and the effort that you're spending just trying to get something resolved, far outweighs that value and that value exchange, right? It's so skewed that it's like, no, no more. And so I'll point out this pink jacket that I'm wearing to sort of tell a story about that. I This women's clothing store had a sale, and I went online. I love the color pink. They had this jacket, great price. I, submitted my order. I saw the confirmation online that the order was complete. But then I noticed the next day, I was like, I didn't get the email confirmation that you get for it. So first because I'm not new to these type of issues, I check with my bank, and there's a pending order for the store. So I call them and say, hey, say this, I haven't got the confirmation email. I have a pending order. And they were like, well, the order just didn't go through. And I'm like, well, I have a pending charge and I saw it on the screen. They just insisted that the order um, didn't go through. So I was really frustrated. So I got off the phone, and what I did was I had noticed I had given them a phone number with in the ordering process that they could send me text messages. I had started getting text messages at that phone number. So how did the text messages start if the order didn't go through, right? So I sent an email, and showed I was getting these marketing messages and explained what that issue was, and I, and showed them these are the items that I, w- were ordering, and the pending charge, added up to that. This order does exist. Still got back, no, the order must have just didn't go through then. The order just mustn't go through. So I was fully frustrated. So the next day I checked with my bank, and the pending order had disappeared. So I said, okay, enough with this. I stopped the text messages, and I said, I'm just not going to shop with them anymore. You can't even figure out an order when I've sent you money, and then and with this. And then lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I'm walking up to my door, and what's that? A package in front of my door with what? This pink jacket. All right. All right. So this is all right. So I'm saying, okay, this is crazy. But then I started saying, oh my goodness, am I a thief? They I don't have there wasn't the pending order had disappeared. And I said, oh. So I went and checked on in my bank, and the day before the jacket had got delivered, they had charged me, had made that charge again. So I'm still not a customer of that store anymore. But let's just see how they have no idea why I'm not a customer anymore. To their mind, they think they've delivered, but obviously there's something between their point of sale system and their inventory and their marketing and sales things that don't talk to each other, that allow this order to slip through the cracks, at least on the part where frontline workers could see there was an order, but somehow the delivery part of the business could see that there was an order and they delivered it, and they somehow could also, make the actually take the money out with it, and they were, trying to market to me, but see how all those systems just didn't interact. And that's the example. What a big point I try to make in the book is that sometimes technology can exacerbate um, poor customer experiences, because businesses will insist that things are or aren't happening based on what they see in the system, but that's just that part of the system that particular employee is seeing, and they aren't actually capturing all that's going on. So yeah, the tale of the pink jacket.
No, completely. Yeah, I think that's an incredible story because I think so many people can resonate to that as well. And it actually just reminded me of another kind of incident that happened with myself last year, actually, where kind of technology played a role in my kind of unpaid customer labor. Right. So I got a bill from the water company, right? And it was for a 3 month period, and they charged me $18,000 for a water bill, and this is for one of my properties back in the UK, $18,000. And when I called them up, and I was like, something is clearly wrong here. It's a 2-bed apartment. There's no way that the tenants could be using that much kind of water, right? And they were like, "Oh, let me look at the system." And I can't remember the exact number, but I do remember that it was the equivalent of using 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day for 3 months solid. And even though, even though the system had kind of picked up that there was some sort of kind of usage happening, there was no flags in the technology to alert, like to trigger an alert to them or to me or anything like this. And this just led to something which kind of took about, so started in February, ended in July. So it literally took 5 months to resolve, and just back and forths, me as the customer having to chase up my own inquiries and find out what's going on and be passed on from person to person. So it's costing them a ton of money in terms of just resourcing to resolve, but it's also costing me a lot of time and effort and my own resources to kind of get this resolved as well. So yeah, I can completely relate to that. Sometimes technology can just be a hindrance, and maybe we haven't innovated enough to actually fix these things.
Absolutely. The unpaid customer labor is just, it's untenable, right? Like, do you have another 5 months to deal with some other issue like that, and then another and another? Because that's also the situation now, is that you have overlapping issues, and so then you have an issue with this company and an issue with that company and this company, and you're trying to juggle all of these things and get them resolved. And oftentimes, when you have to, your story, have to convince them that's an issue.
Literally
And
had to
then
gather all
they
this evidence and all sorts.
evidence, right? Yeah, to prove
Working
you have
hard,
an
working hard
issue.
for them.
I know. I
Yeah,
was effectively I was doing 2 jobs, and what's actually kind of funny actually is that to your point in terms of like technology playing a role, I think there's an over reliance on technology. So they're looking at the computers and seeing what's being read to them, and they're like, that must be truth. Instead of kind of using their own kind of critical thinking to actually kind of answer some of these kind of questions and come to a conclusion.
ab- absolutely. Now, sometimes there's a lucky incident, and I mentioned in the book, is if you actually encounter an employee, and I call her Peggy. She's that, either that longtime employee who knows everything, and can immediately spot there's an issue, or sometimes it's a newer employee, but they're just really conscientious about things that are going on. If you happen to encounter a Peggy, Peggy's going to say, no, that's not right. And Peggy knows, say John, who's in such and such department, and Peggy will get your issue fixed, right? But most times you aren't encountering a Peggy. If you encounter Peggy, the world is safe for that day. But oftentimes you just have employees, like you say, who they tell you things that don't even make sense if you say them out loud, but they'll say them anyway, or they act as though data in computers can't be wrong. It's inaccurate data everywhere, you know what I mean? And they'll just tell you this, and you're like, no, and you're presenting evidence why it's not, and they're still, insisting. And so that, yeah, that's all part of that unpaid customer labor, is just even getting to an employee, because first you have to go through these different the technology first approach to customer experience and customer support. So first, just even trying to get to actual human, because technology can be very inflexible, right? You have this problem, but it's not actually designed to solve the problem. And so you're trying to get to actually a human who might be able to understand the issue. And if that person doesn't understand it, then you try to keep going to another person until you can get to a Peggy who understands the issue and actually make him resolve it. But oftentimes, like your story, it'll take months, you know.
Yeah, and you don't even, and I think this is probably going to be kind of exacerbated even further with AI as well. Because I feel like the instantaneous trust that the public, or well, all of us that seem to have, like in AI, like just from the get go, is actually quite frightening. So as we integrate more AI into these systems as well, it's going to be harder for people to believe that the system can be wrong. So we're probably going to end up with more situations where there's unpaid customer labor happening.
Right. And that's really a concern of mine, especially with the data that's AI is based on, is, mostly like Western, um, you know, also all of the sort of the historical inaccuracies and biases and all that things are all in that data. I mean, if they're pulling from books, who's traditionally been allowed to be an author, right? I mean, now we have more that you can, self-publish and things like that, but that's just in recent years. So like, whose voice and whose perspectives are the basis for a lot of the the data that these models are developed off of. And then I think about how inaccurate systems are that collect data within transactions, and then they're basing information on that too, with within AI models. So yeah, I do think that you know the sources for the information that these AI models are being based off of are really flawed. And then as people want to rely on them, because yeah, nobody has enough time for anything, right? And so if they can, use some kind of AI tool to improve their productivity, then hey, of course I will use it. And of course it's true, right? And yeah, um, and the world that what we live in now, that misinformation is profitable, then unfortunately, that's a challenge that we'll be facing.
Yeah. And as Jay said, I think, it's a challenge that's just going to get bigger and bigger as we kind of move ahead. But the challenge is already existing, right? What do you think, Lisa, in terms of how companies can kind of overcome, this unpaid labor, right? How how do companies get closer to the customer needs and, really understand some of these problems?
But I think they have to put in the work within several phases of the customer relationship. You know, are we, one, talking to our customers and really understand their needs and wants, when you're developing products? Are we looking at the data that we already have? Like, I've encountered companies that I work with that, are fairly large, but they have really unreliable, analytics, right? And so are we even looking at the data that we have, and that it's actually good data? Are we actually talking to customers? in when we decide to develop products or make changes to it, um, are we designing them with those things in mind? Um, then on the implementation phase, we often have unrealistic deadlines and taking shortcuts to get things out, and that you know has a range of bugs and different things that cause problems. So we have to think about that too. And then we also, it's testing. Like, people can just throw anything out, out in the world, out in the marketplace, but if it actually tested it and are you monitoring it? And then to like Jay's example, um, when you monitor it and you see something that is shouldn't be occurring, like, are you actually raising the flag to actually do something about it? So there's putting in that's putting in some work, and to be able to make those changes to improve experiences. And like I said, a big two other big pieces of it is that incentive structure, which you're incentivizing, but also it also has to be like a change management approach throughout the organization, and you have to have leadership that's modeling that behavior and encouraging it, for it to actually sink in. So, if a leader is saying, yes, we're customer centric, we're customer centric, but then they put an unrealistic deadline that we're going to have this new overhaul done within 3 months, then they're actually not modeling what they're saying, right? Because it takes more time than that to actually, release a whole overhaul of the system that's well thought out and well implemented. So, yeah.
Yeah, some good points there. And, I think it does come down to leadership. They're obviously going to be the ones that are going to be driving a lot of this change, And yeah, I really specifically like the point that you mentioned there, Lisa, just on, making sure we're doing the right testing, right? Because I feel like often we launch, the team's just so focused on the next feature or the next product that they're going to be working on. We never really spend the time reviewing, analyzing, going back to all the features that we launched, right? And seeing how are those working, right? Are we getting the output that we're expecting? Not just from a financial value, but also from a, like you said, experience, right? Our customers liking this new feature, they're engaging with it in the right way. So yeah, it's that constant review or analysis of the stuff that we've launched recently, right?
Absolutely. And I not too long ago had a potential project with a news organization, and they had um, launched a new app uh, about a year or so ago, and they had a horrible customer response to it. And I could look just even in the app store at the reviews and started to see a pattern of some of what the issues are. But then this project didn't go through because they didn't have the budget for it. But they didn't have a budget for um, a product that engagement was way down. People were not using it. It had really poor reviews. Like, what did you have money for? If this was a big major conduit of how people get information, and that's what your business, you're in a news business, is for. And so, it's priorities too. And, are we prioritizing that type of thing?
Yeah, that definitely plays a big factor, right? The prioritization is a huge factor to it. Just going back to your book, Lisa. So I'm really curious to hear where the idea of doing this storytelling came from, because it's like there are lots of short stories. Yeah, what was the driver behind going down that route versus a more conventional, like chapter book, base book, whatever it might be?
Well, in my work as a researcher, oftentimes what will get stakeholders to really understand there's a problem and something needs to be done about it is if when they hear it in customers' own words when they see the video of the customer struggling and things like that. And so I've, definitely felt like I needed to bring real stories to the forefront of the book, right? And to sort of break them down within it. And like I said, when I was lucky enough to meet Antonio, the illustrator, and he had such a talent for making this story illustrations, making the story so compelling that you understood it without a whole lot of words. I definitely felt like that brought out that, the storytelling at its best.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's something you're quite passionate about, right? Using storytelling. I'm assuming you've used, as you've said, you've used it quite a lot in your day to day, right? And yeah, are there any specific aspects or parts of that that you would give advice to, any aspiring designers out there that need to kind of convince their stakeholders? Do you feel like storytelling is the ideal way to go about that?
I think that if you can balance storytelling with some analytics and data, I think that's like the good balance of it. So any way that you can bring the customer's voice in, either through a highlight reel, a quote, having stakeholders actually observe real time when you're doing customer interviews or usability testing, and they can kind of experience the pain that the customer is experiencing in real time. That's going to be helpful. People will, as a colleague or something, they may challenge you on whether something is important or not. But when they see, actual someone who is expected to buy or use their product and having trouble with it, it's a whole lot harder to argue with. And I would say if they're seeing actual customers struggling with it and they're arguing about whether you should change it, then you have a bigger problem, right? But when they see it, that typically it helps you, be more convincing of things that you might need to change. And then if you can bring those numbers in of, whether it's calls or whether it's drop-offs in sign-ups or lack of engagement or something like that as well, if you can marry those two things together, I think that goes a long way in convincing stakeholders of the importance of making changes.
Nice. Look, Lisa, I wanted to also just, I want to make sure we're covering this because you've also developed a couple of frameworks, right, as well. So we have the 3Q do no harm framework, I think it is, and the categories of harm list. Can you tell us a bit about these frameworks and what it actually means, right? Because it's something you've been working on for some time, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, starting out the 3Q do no harm framework, 3Q stands for three questions. So it's a three-question framework, and it's designed for teams to use to be proactive about identifying what potentially harms that a product or service or technology might potential harms that might they might have within it. And it's important as why I developed it is because I was seeing more and more stories where, in the news where there's some product and, it's doing, something bad and customers are complaining about it or users complaining about it. And then there was always the response from the company was always like, well, we weren't aware of it. And it was like, well, that's actually your responsibility as you put things out in the marketplace and expect people to buy and use them. And so I was thinking, well, how can we sort of help people um, in developing them so that they could identify some of these harms before they happen? And so part of the 3Q do no harm is the first question is who's not here. And so one of the pieces that I felt like about when there were issues with products that you see in the news is that they didn't either have diverse teams or they didn't have diverse people within their research participants, because when you have different lived experiences, then you see different aspects of problems and you're able to sort of, hopefully you have safety in your team that you can voice, hey, this is a problem because of this, and this. And so, from your lived experience, as a teammate, you may be able to, communicate that and bring that forward. But also in your research participants, if you have people who have different experiences and perspectives, you also get different feedback on whether a product or service would actually work. So, like for one example, when you're thinking about you know all these issues with facial recognition software, as someone who has melanated skin, I know that in some photographs I am not. You don't see me as visibly as other people. So I know when someone is suggesting facial recognition software, what is the quality of the photograph that you are using. And I also know that there's data that shows that people who have darker skin or women are being misidentified, right? And so that's when people have different lives experiences, they can bring that perspective to a product. The second thing for is the second question for the 3Q do no harm is how are vulnerable groups negatively impacted? Because we have to, consider who can be harmed the most with that, and so we have to think about what our product, what the impact could it be if you are doing something that can potentially restrict somebody's access to their money. Well, it affects people who have less money more severely. And so, therefore, we need to think about and consider that when we're designing a product. Um, then the third question is if something goes wrong, how can it be resolved quickly and easily? And so that's, designing for the unhappy path. We always assume that the technology will work perfectly, and we can, have done the research and done the right things, but sometimes things do happen. So making sure that process of actually being able to resolve it is a smooth process. And so doing actually designing that part is important as well. So there is no unpaid customer labor. So the 3Q do no harm, it can be layered in your process. The earlier you apply it, even when you're just thinking of different ideas, the better it is because you're not so cemented in what you're doing that you can't make changes. And three questions, people say, well, how can three questions, cover all of this? But it's really about asking and answering the questions and resolving the issues that underline it. And then another tool is with categories of harm. These are just common areas of concern that potential product harms, so financial, health, privacy, misinformation. And that's a way of being more systematic to make sure what you are designing and proposing that you've actually evaluated against like particular common areas of harm, and that you're taking the time to, if you identify an issue, to resolve it. And are those that list of harm, those nine exhaustive? No. And there are also other tools like that, but it's being sure that you are consistent and systematic in it, brings about a better result, because you know that you have covered common areas within it, and you can adjust it for your product or your industry to make sure that you're identifying things that are really relevant to you. So those are two of the two frameworks, and I often do like trainings and things like that, to teams can bring that within their process within it. Yeah.
What would you say is like the best way for someone to like just get started with using these frameworks? Is it something that they can
So
just like roll up to work and just just apply straight away, or I don't know, how do you go about it?
well, I think, if we're looking at your products you have now, if there, been issues that have been identified, and, if you can sort of like voice, like if we had have been a little bit more proactive in, identifying potential issues and resolving them, then this would have saved us more time and more and reputational risk and things like that. So if you haven't already had a boo boo, then you can bring that up to as a reason to implement this. But one of the things that I would do with the categories of harmless is just like in a team meeting, take a little time and start with just using those categories and have different team members identify potential like products where that harm has been recognized, right? So like the Robin Hood app that has had, this week was the second time that they've had a major fine with I think it was the SEC about how their app works. So like having your team like identify other companies that have these issues kind of gets them their muscle going and thinking and with it before you then the follow up is okay, we're thinking about this idea, let's look at it from these aspects. So they've already sort of loosened up their thinking around other companies. So and then when they get to the the idea or the product that they're trying to develop, um, they can start to okay look at this a little bit more objectively, not feeling like, oh, I'm attacking what we're doing first, right? So that's a way I feel like has been successful in introducing it to a company. Yeah.
And it feels like these tools can be used at pretty much any stage, right? In any part of the process that you're working on, right? It feels like you could definitely apply them at each step. But was there any, when you were crafting these tools, was there anything or specifically you had in mind, Lisa, on when you feel that these tools can really kind of, or these frameworks can really come into play? Especially like the three Qs, right?
Well, I think the 3Q do no harm, that is a bigger sort of change management, type of approach. So it's going to take time within, to implement that. But it is a way of checking in when you are, at the start of a process, like who's in the room as we're saying we're going to do this, this thing. Do we have all the players in that we need to have in to make this the best product that we can with it? So I think, yeah, earlier on is definitely the best. But you also can use it retrospectively sometimes when you had something that hasn't gone right to like to see, well, where could we have made made changes and where we should make changes within our process. Yeah.
Nice. And yeah, I guess, Lisa, how do we're kind of covering here, ethics. We're talking a bit about harm, right, as well, and how these things can kind of connect. How do you feel these concepts will evolve in the future? Especially, Jay mentioned AI a bit earlier, right? And all these new technologies coming in and the way things are developing. How do you feel like these frameworks will, be used in the future or will have to be used in the future?
Well, I definitely think that there are, definitely in the immediate future, we have a lot of different challenges and headwinds against sort of ethical research and design. AI has companies have, and sometimes I would say like a reckless approach to AI. They've just stuck it everywhere and anywhere they can, just trying to force feed it to people, whether they wanted it or not. There's still the unanswered questions about copyrights and using other people's work, and oftentimes it's the little the little the smaller artist or creator whose work is being sucked up and being benefiting a larger healthier, company. And so I think that those challenges are going to going to be very difficult in the near future until we get some rein on what is the exact ways that we should approach that. Do we have the exact legislation and things like that? I know, like, they have the EU AI Act, but the U.S. has not implemented anything, across the board. Different states have done different smaller things. Like, I think it's Illinois where you can't use biometric data and stuff like that. But until we sort of have something comprehensive, there are definitely going to be challenges within that. And so people within companies are going to have those challenges. And then I think, far as in the U.S., we have a new administration coming in who I would say is more on the side of businesses and not necessarily on the side of protecting customers, and that's going to have some impact because the Biden administration had announced a new initiative called Time is Money, and it was cracking down on all the ways that companies waste customers' time. And, it was really speaking my language. That was in August. Well, that's not, with the new administration, I don't see any of that going anywhere. So I do think that we're going to have challenges. But then there's a lot of people who are really passionate about, like, not not allowing unethical uses of technology and things like that, and are really passionate about it. So I think you have to find your people, like, you know who the groups and the organizations and the companies that are more aligned with your values. That's what I do. I made that decision when I was 9 years old. I wouldn't shop at a particular store anymore, and I make those decisions every day. And so that's a part of it. Like, it's in your work, but also it's in your capacity as a consumer, right? Because money and lack of revenue does make some changes. Yeah.
And what role do you think we play, as researchers, designers, in changing this ethical behavior, right, that we're seeing, and changing the way that we do things? What role do you think we have to play in this, Lisa?
Well, I think you have to be motivated by your own inner moral compass, and you try to align yourself with who you work for, uh, that aligns with that as best you can. I know in capitalistic societies and all of that, no companies are perfect, but directionally, are they going in the right direction? I think that's important. I think if it's a safe place for you to advocate for particular changes, and you can bring that storytelling and data along to convince people, then do that as well. But I also know that I don't want to put on any particular person's shoulders that they can they can fix capitalism, as one researcher or a designer within it. So I think it's like, say, find your people who may be doing the projects or things that you're passionate about, when in that direction ethically. If that's what you need to do, then do that as well.
Yeah, I definitely feel that you do get to a point where you're going to have to make a decision on, yeah, is the company right for me? If you've tried everything, if you worked to try and change the way they approach things, if you tried to change the way that they think about, the way that we kind of communicate with our customers, or the way that we resolve issues, or the way that we're moving forward in the direction we're going, I guess there is that realization at some point where you might have to say, yeah, this doesn't align with what I'm going after, right? So maybe it is the time potentially to look for something new or to move on. Yeah, it's a harsh reality, right? At least that you've got to kind of make with these things.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I don't try to put that pressure on, one particular person to do it, to do it all because they can. And, they're definitely um, up, up against, massive systems of power. Yeah, definitely.
So, Lisa, just to summarize on the book, I know it's obviously it's lots of different great stories, and I'm sure everyone would love to check that out. Who is your target audience? I know it's probably for a lot of people, right? But did you have in mind when you was writing this or creating this book? Was there anyone specifically that you were targeting that you feel you wanted to make sure that your voice was heard?
So I targeted, decision makers and companies, that decision makers around, product technology, customer experience, because and budget. I was targeting them because I thought that there definitely was a lack of awareness of how bad really bad customer experiences are, and like they really didn't want their company's name associated with it, so wanted to bring that forward, for decision makers. But it's also just definitely for anybody who's in um in the process of creating and developing, implementing, product, services, or technology, or supporting them.
Amazing, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it could be for pretty much anyone, but it's great to hear that you were thinking a little bit more about, like, yeah, the decision makers and the budgets, as you mentioned there, right?
Yeah.
No, it makes sense, and yeah, no, I think the book and the framework really interesting, and I'll definitely be using the three Qs as something that I can definitely see the value in, right? Especially getting your whole team to consider it as well, right? Like if all your team are thinking about these three questions when we're approaching projects, starting new projects, or even maybe doing research, right? I can see another great application there, right? Um, yeah, it's definitely something I want to try and integrate.
Yeah, same. Those three Qs just sound so powerful, and like even like projects I'm working on at the moment, I'm just kind of considering them now, like in my head, and it's like, are we like meeting or answering those questions?
Definitely. And more what you mentioned of the whole team, because that's one of the pieces of it that's really important, is a lot of time there's one of two people on the team who really think about these things, but that's really everybody's responsibility on the team to think about these things. So in bringing those forward, emphasizing, hey, this is all our responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, if you can just get that framework, on a wall or just integrated in your team's process, that will always kind of get everyone on the path, right?
Yeah, completely. I've got a question for you. Is like after all of this, and you're kind of like seeing your kind of work out in the wild, and you're seeing teams like adopt it and they talk about it and stuff. Like, what's next for you? Like, what's next in your plans for 2025?
Well, I have developed a training program, a corporate training program based on the stories in the book, because each of the stories indicated sort of different issues within organizations, and so I'm rolling that out this year, to help influence, internally, like helping employees across the organization understand their part in making good customer experiences, good user experiences. Like the people in finance probably don't think they have anything to do with user experience, but I was working with one company, and like their finance processes were so challenging that customers were getting literally hundreds of invoices a month, right? Which challenged that the customer, company and productivity, right? But yeah, your finance processes really did have something to do with the customer experience. So yeah, so these training programs are really trying to help people across organization understand their role in customer experiences, but then also there are targeted trainings that emphasize content and why that's important, and why testing is important, training is important, all of those types of things. So that's what next. My sister keeps saying that there probably will be a book number two, and that might be more B to B stories because there are plenty of those as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it. It's like you can resonate with these stories, right? Because these are clearly things that they're learned experiences from you, but you've crafted them in a way that you're kind of telling that story. And I think, yeah, there's so many, right? There's so many aspects. Yeah, like you said, B2B. You can come at it from loads of different angles. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you. And then I say that, when I tell these stories, everybody has a story to tell me back. And so I say everybody has one, two, or nine stories that they can share. And so that's also part of the book that I want to bring awareness of, that at least as far as thinking of as your perspective, if you are encountering so many issues as a consumer, the chances are that your customer may be experiencing some issues with you. Like, the numbers are again are, a bit against you, that your customers, everything's perfect here if you as a customer are encountering so many issues across different industries. Because like in the book, I'm talking about banking, health insurance, retail, government, like cable television, so like your pharmacy, so like a dining, so it's all across industries within it.
Yeah, there's no stopping you now. I think there's like such so many kind of different topics that this can kind of lend itself to, or kind of avenues that you can take. So I'm kind of looking forward to kind of seeing that what else kind of comes from you kind of this year as well.
Me too.
Great. And Lisa, obviously we're going to leave the links to your frameworks, and we'll leave the links obviously also to the book, so people obviously can go out and purchase that. But yeah, is there any other place that people can find you, Lisa, or anything else you'd like to plug today?
Well, certainly, you can always find me on my website, services.net. I'm on LinkedIn. It's L Dance or Lisa D Dance. It's not that many Lisa Dances out there. So, yeah, connect on there as well. And the book is available on my website. Today is the perfect day .com, but it's also available at bookstores like bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and other retailers. At least the physical book is available there on their websites as well.
Awesome.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks for coming on the show, Lisa. We really appreciate your time. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been a great episode, and it's been lovely talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed talking with you all as well.